Yo, it's Multiplier here today, as you would expect on the Multiplier channel, because that's just pretty much, I mean, that's just logical, that is. It's like physics or something. So, what are we doing? Well, Firekracker, that's what we're doing. I've made this track for my upcoming album, Collect All and Rave. Pretty good title, right? It's like collect all and save, but we're not saving, we're raving. That's going to be the tagline. But yeah, what I'm doing as part of the process of just being awesome and stuff, I'm sharing the session file with you. This is a nicer way to kind of release it, I guess. So I think the guys like David, I was going to say Dave Back Luke, Laid Back Luke, and David Heartbreak. I'm getting the two people merged as one person. They're two separate people, two individuals, two personalities, two lives. But yeah, David Heartbreak, Laid Back Luke, off the top of my head, kind of did a similar thing where they kind of shared their session file. Zoop, see what I did there? So just like that, I have kind of shared my session file through the wonders of Splice, this really cool platform. And the cool thing is, if you check out the link below, if you haven't already, you can kind of listen to the track and then see kind of what elements are happening when, and just kind of see how it's all broken down. And then you can see some wonderful comments from this guy right here, things like that, or that, etc. ... But yeah, definitely recommend, if you haven't already heard the track or had a quick look at the comments, have a listen, see what you think. If you don't like it, like it. If you do like it, great. Otherwise, you can still get some useful production stuff one way or another. And yeah, so what I thought I'd do in this video is kind of elaborate on these ideas, just so you can learn more about the universe and life in general. But yeah, Splice is awesome. If you haven't heard of it, what it does is it does kind of three things, I think, at least the way I imagine it. So it does kind of collaboration. So if you're working with someone else on Ableton, you can kind of save your project kind of to the internet or wherever stuff lives, and you can both kind of work on it and kind of send different versions back and forth. So it's just kind of the nicest way to collaborate, really. You can put comments, see different versions, all that kind of good stuff. It's also a nice way of backing up all your projects, because let's be honest, how often does this happen? Working away, oh no, not my beer all over my computer. That happens on a daily basis for me. If it was all backed up to the internet, that would never happen. Well, it would happen, but then you still have all your lovely projects, which will get you to the top of the Beatport chart. So that's good. And yeah, also it's a great way of kind of sharing sessions, just like what I'm doing right now. So check it out. But yeah, let's get straight into the explaining and elaborating and all that kind of good stuff. I'm going to close down Safari. Oh, there you go. Oh, you saw behind the curtain there. That was like behind the scenes stuff. Just because my computer will blow up otherwise. I'm going to turn Wi-Fi off as well. So let's turn Wi-Fi off, because my computer is about to explode. Right, cool. Let's get into it. Where did the track start? Where did it begin? What's the most relevant points? All of those can be explained with this guy, which is kind of like the main kind of driving factor behind the whole song. It's how it all started. So I started off by choosing 160 BPM, which is way high. Wowzers, trousers is that a high BPM, which I thought was a bit different, a bit weird, a bit like, whoa. And then what I did after that is some cool stuff. So I got a simple drum loop, which is normally 130 BPM. So I sped it up to 160, so it's going mental, and then sounds a bit like this by itself, which is kind of cool, but it's like, cool. But when you add this other layer behind it, which is like, it's being delayed, it's got a bit of saturation, a bit of filtering, I don't even know what's going on, but it's cool, right? It's a preset in Sigmund called Horse. One of my favorite presets within Sigmund, delay plugin. But yeah, that's what's going on there. When you combine the two, sounds like this. Which is really cool. So it kind of serves a really good point where it just takes a really simple kind of straight drum loop, which is kind of here, and then just kind of gives it a bit of life, a bit of rhythm, kind of gives it this kind of angsty sort of nervous energy that I think is really cool. And it just kind of makes me want to move, makes me want to go, especially because it's at a different sort of BPM than you'd expect for a drum loop like this. Especially with that weird kind of, delays. It's hard to explain. It's like, just kind of moves about in this weird sort of cool way. I'm going to show you again because I really like it. Listen to the delay layer. I think that's really cool, and it just kind of gives it really nice energy. Just kind of sets the tone and the whole kind of pace and the energy. It just makes me want to go. It's good. I like it. It's great even. And yeah, that's kind of how the song got started. And then after that, it was a case of, well, where do I go from here? I added in some cool stuff, like I got and added some distorted kicks like this guy. Oh, over here even. Can't put a price on that, although sample pack labels do. And I made it myself, by the way. And I also did this kind of preset I made in Gladiator that sounds like this. Which is kind of weird. I was mucking about with Gladiator because it was a really cool synth. Made that cool sound and was like, let's use it in a track. But that's kind of how the track got started. But let's tell you something more producer relevant, something more, some insight, some next level tip that's going to explode your brain or something. So let's demonstrate something, a really important principle when it comes to producing that can't be emphasized enough. I talk about it all the time. And it is called don't do stuff. That's the technique. So I have this distorted kick that was in that sample pack that I made a while ago. And it's kind of, it's almost like a kick and a bass rolled into one. Sounds like this. So it sounds like we've got a kick and then a bass. I forget how I made it, but it's kind of like a kick and a bass rolled into one. And the cool thing about it is I didn't even need to process it because I processed it originally. So the sample that we're dragging in is already processed. We know looking at this, we can see the transients of how we want them to be. Like the bass bit's all flattened out. The attack of the kick is hitting where it needs to. But we've still got a little bit of dynamics at the front half of the sound. Also with the saturation, it's the right level of saturation. And yeah, I didn't need to do any processing. Look, no processing, because you know what? The processing you do is down to what you start off with. So just because it's a kick or a bass doesn't mean you should, like, I don't know, boost it here or compress here. If it's all right to begin with, it's all right. It's all right. Leave it. There's no need to process it. But similarly, if you need to process it in a way that kind of works with your original sample, not just because maybe you saw Multiplier or whoever say, I don't know, I boost my kicks here, so you must always boost your kicks there, because that's not how it works. You process things based on how they are and where you want them to be. So processing's like the middle bit. In this case, we're already where we need to be. So we're all good in the hood. So really, really important stuff. But yeah, in terms of the actual track, this is kind of like the second main idea for me, at least the way I see the track. We got that main percussion loop, which is kind of setting the energy. It's a bit different, a bit interesting. And this kind of long, as I say, long distorted kick just really kind of applies this kind of weight and pressure. It's kind of like this heavy squeezing sort of kick. It's just, I don't know, it just kind of hits and kind of squeezes and applies the weight in a really nice sort of way. And I really like it. That's kind of like the main idea behind the track. So everything else has to really kind of live around those two ideas. Because whenever you're doing stuff like mixing, the way you should mix, the way you should start off your mix is you have to decide, like, really objectively, what is the most important idea in my track? Or what is the second most important idea in my track? Or what are the two important ideas in my track? You get what I'm saying? So what are the important ideas? How do we make those important ideas that make it musically interesting? How do we make them shine? How do we let them do what they do? So if you have some musically interesting ideas, the whole point of the mix is to emphasize them and to make them stand out. It's not to necessarily do a traditional kind of generic mix. It's about letting those ideas shine. Everything else sits around that. So you really have to consciously especially, decide what is the important idea and then work around that. That's going to be the main approach. So that's kind of how I did the mix as well. So you got that percussive loop, that kick, and then there's one other idea happening in this track, and that is the vocal, which I've had a lot of people say it sounds really good. I think it sounds good too. Sounds like this. Yo, straight up, yo, straight up. Analog to digital, give beats a GP physical from edge to inner, beginning to winner from pillar to post. Sounds pretty cool, right? And what is it? It's a ragga vocal, sped up, something that I do quite a lot in my tracks. So some of you will probably recognize it. I did some cool processing, and the processing I did emphasizes yet another really, really important point from like a producer's point of view. Something that, well, I don't really talk about much, but I think it's really important. It's on a similar vein to the similar vein to the previous point, but it's kind of different. So it was over here, now it's over here, that kind of vibe. So what is this important point? That is, when it comes to doing things like compressing, which I am compressing the vocal here a few times, you've got to make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. So the way that I typically kind of compress vocals, I'll first of all explain why I compress vocals, but pretty much not anything else, typically at least. So vocals, when you record them, have a certain dynamics because all humans kind of talk, broadly speaking, in a similar sort of way, and we kind of record vocals in a similar sort of way. So we end up with something that is dynamically reasonably consistent. Now, the problem with that is the dynamics of vocals don't really tend to stand out in dance music, which is quite dynamically flat. So what we need to do, we need to kind of compress them or apply other processing techniques so that dynamically the vocals kind of sit with everything else that's going on in a dance track. Now, this is different for stuff like a bass or a kick or a synth or a sound effect because you're designing those sounds from scratch normally. So if you're designing a bass sound, you don't need to then change the dynamics because you can just design the dynamics for the bass to be right from the beginning. Whereas you can't do that with a vocal. Vocals come out of human beings, not computers. It's an important point. So for that reason, we typically need to compress vocals. And I think the best way to compress vocals is to really kind of focus on what the compression is doing and kind of turn the process of compressing into, instead of necessarily just doing it transparently, try and do it like in a creatively interesting way. And the best way to do that is to grab a really good plugin that does compression, something like Isotope Alloy, or I suppose Ableton has some really good vocal presets as well. Not that I really dig in them, but just get some decent plugin or a decent thing with some good vocal presets and just kind of flick through the presets. Keep flicking through the presets until, so you can really kind of hear the difference that the compression is doing, because different compression settings with different corresponding EQs. So if we have a look at this first one I did, for example, it looked like it was tight pop performance or whatever that is. We got some EQ going on, which is pretty crazy. We're doing some stuff with the transients. We got a little bit of exciting going on. And we got some stuff with the dynamics happening with a gate and a compressor and a de-esser. So you got all this stuff going on. And that's adding something, and that's changing the character of the vocal. Because when you're compressing, yes, you can probably compress in quite a transparent way, but it'd be more interesting if you compress in an interesting way. So flick through the presets and listen to the way it sounds, and then kind of pick the one that kind of sounds the way you want it to sound. Does that kind of make sense? Hopefully it does. I think it's a nicer way of doing it instead of just starting from scratch every time. And then, because vocals typically fit within a certain band anyway, like your attack time is always going to be, broadly speaking, in a certain sort of range. Your release time is going to be in a certain sort of range. Your ratio is going to be in a certain sort of range. And you can kind of dial it in yourself. But I think it's nicer and quicker and just more interesting, and you get a nicer result if you just flick through presets until something catches your ear and you're like, yes, that dynamic is interesting. Because that way you're picking a set of dynamics that jumps out at you. Instead of you forgetting what the original one sounded like and trying to do something yourself, if you just flick through and you're like, yes, that's cool, that jumps out, that stands out, that's gonna be the way to do it. So I think that's the best way to compress vocals. But I did more than that. It's not just simple compression or simple preset. What I did after that, to give it a bit of edge, I used Decimort, this really cool little plug-in from the guys at D16. Shout out to D16. It's like a bit crusher, basically. Does some really cool stuff. And the nice thing about this bit crusher is you can delink the left and the right. So it's not just a standard kind of bit crusher with a little bit of a filter going on. You can like have a different bit crusher for the left ear versus the right ear, and then you can filter it and do some other stuff. It's really cool. But yeah, that's Decimort. Then I did some more. I think I did some more. Yeah, I did another. Did I? No, I bet I didn't. In this case, I did what looks like a little bit of exciting. So one of my standard techniques in giving my vocals a bit of bite, a bit of kind of edge, which is something I do a lot in my vocals, is I kind of excite them or add some upper harmonics or saturation, coloring, call it what you like. And I use Isotope Alloy for that typically because it has some really good presets. So in a similar way to compression, where I think it's better to jump through presets and pick one that sounds interesting, I think it's nicer to do it that way around instead of starting with an empty preset and then kind of trying different settings. Sometimes you start with a preset and tweak it, but I just think it's a nicer way of working. So what I typically do is just drag out a clean instance of Isotope Alloy, go to Exciter, hit the module button, and then Vintage Vocals is one of my key go-to presets. I think it's fucking amazing. I think it's really, really good stuff. And yeah, that's how I add a little bit of edge. So I can probably show you the before and after for that. So this is kind of what it's like just with a little bit of, in fact, with no processing. Yo, straight up, yo, straight up. This is it with the first layer of kind of general compression, which is I think the tight pop performance preset in Isotope Alloy. Yo, straight up, yo, straight up. So it was brighter, a bit more dynamic. or not a bit more dynamic, but a bit more kind of there. The dynamics are different. A little bit of bit crushing. Quite subtle. And this is with the extra harmonics, like the extra saturation, the exciting. See what it kind of gives it that. It's almost like smeary, greasy sort of sparkliness that's happening with the high frequencies. I think it's really cool. And then what I probably did with this one is, yeah, just kind of get rid of those low frequencies with a standard kind of high pass filter or low cut, call it what you like. And then whack it through some reverb. Which also provides just a really nice sort of background layer. So instead of having like an empty like noise floor or an empty kind of layer behind it, I think it's nice just sometimes to have a little bit of reverb sitting there. And again, the guys at D16 produced a banging plugin called Toraverb. It is Toraverbalicious. It is fantastic. But yeah, that's kind of how I approach vocals and how I get them being good. So yeah, that's kind of my track. There's lots of other little things floating about, so I definitely recommend checking out the Splice kind of session. You can download this whole session and yeah, enjoy digging through it and doing whatever you do, people of the internet. Yes, I've been Multiplier. This has been a video of information and me and Ableton and this microphone, for example. Hope you enjoyed.